Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back in to bring you the Healing Heroic Dazar'alor Guide, Part 2. Everything you need to know about the next 3 bosses from Opulence, Conclave, and Rastahkhan, in a quick and easy to consume format. The big things that you as a healer need to focus on to help your team get the boss down. Going into Opulence, you're going to have 2 different routes here. You'll see footage of our split runs from me on my Shaman going into the left side while playing my Priest and going on to the right side from the different golems you have to deal with. Important to note that on the right side, on both sides, you will have different traps you have to deal with here. The consistent ones are going to be things like the flame jets coming out. Different doors on either the left or right side of the room will open up. Gotta be making sure you're watching out for any of those jets. Watch for the doors to close and move into those areas before the next set comes out. And overall, the golem gauntlet that you can call it is overall pretty easy to deal with. You just gotta make sure you're watching your feet, watching out for the rest of the group, and staying away from those golems and their crush abilities because they have a very large radius and you want to be able to stay away from them. When you're on the right side, you're going to be having to deal with those flames of punishment where you'll need to stack tightly on it the back left foot of the golem. That way you're going to be able to quickly pivot as he moves clockwise and bursts his AoE onto a very large cone in front of him. Positioning on the left side with the volatile charges is extremely important. They'll deal quite a bit of damage here. Healing on the left side is quite a bit more intensive than on the right, and it'll be interesting to see as we move on to Mythic how we're going to be taking that into consideration. Some of the different fire lines going up onto this, as you'll see on the left side, we were able to take advantage of that scorching ground from one of the traps to be able to lower our health pools as we get to basically the apex of the turn. So instead of going left all the time, you'll start going forward, start going north into the room, so you can start curving around to go into the boss's room. This is where you'll be able to drop your health down to 50% to take advantage of the secondary stat buff. It wasn't too mandatory for us on Heroic, but it helped push maybe just a little bit more easily and helped us go a little bit further. We let everybody dip down to that 50% mark and then started topping everybody back off to a safe position before we moved on to the next set. You have to watch out for any of the hex of the lethargies and just be dispelling those as rapidly as you possibly can. And now as we're moving on a little bit closer past dodging all of the traps, you're going to have the 2 different crystals, the royal jewels that the healers will be able to take advantage of. You will have the amethyst and of course the sapphire. The amethyst is going to grant the bearer 50% haste, and any of the heals that you're able to put out are going to grant a 99% damage reduction from Shadow. This is important for the Thief's Bane, so anybody who picks up a crystal after 30 seconds will take a massive Shadow hit. So if you're having a 99% damage reduction to that, they're barely take any damage at all. And then later on, as you go into the Golem phase, into the actual Opulence encounter, the Whale of Greed also deals shadow damage. So we had our Disc Priests taking the Amethyst whenever possible. The extra haste allowed for a massive amount of extra damage to be dealt, and it's extremely easy to apply the Amethyst buff onto the targets, the Shadow Touch targets. I was able to do it with Holy Nova, Halo, and was totally fine and never had really any issues on applying the buff to the targets. Now the Sapphire, any of those heals are going to just stack up a buff onto the target, increasing their damage. So we again made it so that the non-Disc Priest was having the Sapphire, so that they would be able to heal the Disc Priest and start further increasing their damage there. And overall, any of the heals that we were seeing, Healing Rain, Holy Nova, Essence Font, those kind of things, are all having no problem applying the heals to the targets and continuing to stack up the buffs onto the players. So as long as you're keeping an eye on everybody, and as long as you're having your usual area of effect healing going out, your constant spam, honestly, you were able to consistently be spamming targets. It wasn't a problem at all to really deal with. There is going to be the mana regen whenever targets are taking that shadow damage and granting a little bit extra mana to targets. So I was able to spam pretty hard in the Golem phases before we moved on to the boss and regen a lot of mana in the process. As you're going into the actual Opulence encounter itself, after killing the Golems, from there, it's pretty much a stack and burn. You're going to have the liquid golds going out where you'll just have to be running those out quickly. Coin showers, for some reason we kind of kept running into this issue where people weren't sure if they should be running up or stacking up with them. Make sure you're stacking up with the entire group and stacking very tightly underneath the boss to be able to split the damage from the coin showers. If your tanks are able to help out too, and they're not the active tank, that can also be helpful, as long as they're not getting rid of their crystal, their diamond buff, which is very important for their tank stacks. But anything you guys can do to help spread that damage out goes a very long way in helping just straight burn the boss. At this point, you'll also have to watch out for some of the ads that come out. They're usually burned down very quickly. I got a lot of FPS problems from them, so you might be seeing some of them in the clips. Otherwise, there's not too much damage going from them. Just watching the positioning, making sure people are running out in either liquid golds, or just positioning the boss or pivoting the boss if need be to be able to deal with them. Overall, quick burn boss. You're lusting as you get into that phase. Everybody's got cooldowns up, and then straight burning. Watching out for the traps, learning what the traps are going to be doing, and then you shouldn't have any problems with this boss. Moving on to the Conclave of the Chosen. This fight is going to basically be set up where you'll be burning one aspect at a time, and abilities, whenever that aspect is active and you're attacking it, are going to carry over even onto death. So you will be seeing the different abilities going out very periodically. So for us, we had Gonk's aspect, so we will continue to be able to get the raptors coming out and have to be dealing with them consistently. But at the same time, you start with Gonk and Paku at once, so you're also going to be having Paku's Loa coming out and dealing quite a bit of AoE damage onto this. Positioning, there really isn't any reason why you don't have to be, why you can't be stacked up in the group, but we did have casters spreading themselves out. Mobile casters, especially like hunters, were extremely good for this, to be able to spread out from the room to deal with Kragwa the frog. The frog will jump to the farthest away target, so to make sure that 80%, 85% of the raid is able to stack up tightly, you'll have the last couple players spreading themselves out around the room. That way they'll be able to bait out the frog jumps. Having ice blocks, deterrents, any sort of immunities there, especially to bait out frog jumps during Paku's AoE damage, is also extremely valuable. The problems that we had in this fight is whenever an aspect dies, it'll start pulsing raid damage or put a 7 or 8 second dot that deals a lot of damage. So having that align with Paku is extremely deadly, as well as whenever you spawn Kimball, the next aspect after you kill the first one. Kimball will jump to a number of different targets and basically permadot them. If you're having somebody standing in the middle of the raid group as you're stacking up the spread damage from Paku, you pretty much will wipe the entire raid by standing on top of everybody, giving everybody a permanent dot that lasts the entire encounter. Always going to make sure you're staying spread. So if the circle for Paku is something like a compass, we would usually stand on the east or west side, a side facing the middle of the room. And then anytime that we would have Kragwa's jumps coming out, we'd be baiting them out, sometimes with deterrents or ice block. And then any of Kimball's jumps, we would be spreading around the other 3 sides of the compass. That way we wouldn't have to worry about anybody getting permadotted, and the tanks would always face any of the frontal AoEs just outside of the group, as you're able to see right here. So standing at the edge of those circles goes a really long way in keeping everybody alive. And you're going to be having about a minute delay between each of Paku's AoEs, so you should be able to cycle through raid cooldowns without an issue, especially if you're having an aspect die at the same time that you're having any of Paku's AoE raid-wide damage going out. Dispel-wise, you're going to have the Mind Wipe magic effect, so if you're seeing a magic effect, and it's important to have the distinction between magic effects and curse effects in this fight, seeing the magic effect from Mind Wipe, dispel it immediately, preferring healers because it will make the target lose all memory of their abilities. The Hex effect that comes out will be turning the targets, much like you've seen in Untitled Dazar. You'll turn them into baby raptors, and if you dispel them onto somebody else, that person standing in their circle will also become a raptor, right? So a lot of times we didn't really dispel any of them, because by the time that somebody got out to be dispelled, they had 1 or 2 seconds left in the duration. So a lot of times we would just let them run out, drop their stack when they had to, and be able to move back into the boss, no problem, and save ourselves some mana as we started going deeper into the fight. Tank damage can really start ramping up as you're going on, especially if they're taking any sort of permadots. A lot of times we had Kimball cleaves onto the group, which was really annoying for us as we worked on the boss. But as soon as you're able to make sure you're keeping an eye on the tanks, and then cycling through your different raid cooldowns, we tried to make sure we were rotating through our Spirit Link totems very frequently. And the way that we had our split run set up was mainly for leather and male groups, so we didn't have a great range of diversity with CDs, but we were able to mix around enough of what we needed so that we always had CDs up for any combo of Paku and an aspect dying at the same time. From here, when you start getting into the final phase with Akunda, important to be able to watch your feet and start dodging any of the orbs that Akuna is going to be bringing out, as they will deal quite a bit of damage, and pacing yourself with mana, and again, cycling through that constant set of raid CDs. We try to make sure we were having a lot of revivals, for example, for whenever aspects were dying, and then if we had damage going out onto the group while Paku was happening, we'd be able to, drop a healing tide, get everybody stacked up together, and use the Spirit Link if we really needed to. Spirit Links, because everybody is stacked up on this encounter for the majority of it, is extremely helpful and goes a long way in stabilizing the rest of the group. The next boss, moving on to Rastahkhan, there is a wealth of different phases going on over the course of this encounter. So as you're starting it up, your priority, or the DPS priority, will be on his Honor Guard. So you'll have to deal with a Meteor Leap from the Siegebreaker here, and that basically is going to be no different than the Coin Shower from Opulence. Get everybody stacked up very tightly. And what we did is we continued to start moving away from the starting location, because you'll see that almost solar beam effect that was sitting in the middle of the raid that we're trying to kite ourselves away from. So we kept on pulling back to avoid the laser, stacking up for the Meteor Leap, getting everybody into melee when we needed to, and then getting all the range spread out once again. The last of the Honor God will put out a Grievous Axe, which functions just like Grievous Wounds that we healers all love to heal with on Mythic Plus. Heal them above 90% HP to be able to remove the dot. After that point, the most deadly thing with the Honor Guards is a Serpent Totem that has a very annoying frontal, which deals quite a bit of fire damage. You see the scorching detonations that are going off on this fight deal quite a bit of damage, and are pretty much a constant AoE effect you have to worry about from the start, where Rastahkhan comes down, until his final phase, where he starts changing up some of his abilities. So once Bwansamdi comes out, he has about a 35-yard field, and you'll be able to see it by a very faint, very light green circle that forms around him. So you'll always have one tank in the field to be able to tank him. And we basically had our healers spread out just pretty lightly around the radius of that circle, so we'd all be able to reach him and be able to keep our tank alive while healing the rest of the group as well. We would have any of those zombie dust totems that would mind control one player. We just rotated and cycled through our tremors to be able to break that target out, and then we wouldn't have to worry about them taking extra damage or being at risk from other players cleaving off onto them. Then we'd be able to focus the totem down without an issue. Otherwise, in this fight, you're going to have to watch out for the Crest of Death. Deals quite a bit of damage and absorbs healing for the next 5 or 6 seconds. So important there just to make sure people are you're watching the health of those players. They need to be able to have an absorb effect or something like that, like a Life Cocoon, or having your Disc Priest give them a little bit of shielding or something until they can be healed. This will be a lot more prevalent on Mythic, but it's something to kind of get yourself used to as you're going through the fight on Heroic. There shouldn't be too great of threats here. As you're moving on, you're going to be splitting into the Living and Dead phase. So the way that we wanted to do this, especially with our composition, was we wanted to look at how best our raid would be formulated and set up for this. Once somebody's not tanked in that phase, and you're basically just sitting there burning him. So the way that we did it was we had most, if not all, of our melee in the dead phase in Bwansamdi's zone, DPS in the boss full time. We had both of our Resto Shamans, myself included, going down there to be able to heal them. And what this really did for us was it allowed us to just drop our healing reins and continue to dodge any of the swirlies that would go out in that phase, and that would take care of the majority of the healing for us. You will have to watch out for his draw-in effect that could be one-shotting players, but otherwise everybody stacked in and there's periodic ticking damage. It was an absolute dream for healing rain. You'll see a lot of the other death gates that are spawning, like we had on that yellow marker. That'll be used by players to drop their stacks. So around 12 to 15 stacks, we started having people rotating through and dropping them periodically, leaving classes like Demon Hunters or Rogues who could be able to mitigate magic damage or leech to heal themselves a little bit easier. We had them do it near the end, so they would be 16, 17 stacks maybe to be able to clear them a little bit later on, and that will deal a little bit of extra damage to everybody else. But otherwise, it was not too terrible to deal with. And like I said, having Spirit Walker's Grace to be able to use as we're running out of his draw-in effect, being able to cycle through Healing Tide totems, and having everybody stacked up in Healing Rain for the majority of the encounter made it incredibly easy to deal with. And then we had our double monks just providing mainly spot healing when needed in the upstairs realm there. So having all melee, having everybody tightly stacked together to deal with ticking damage was remarkably easy and made our lives a lot made the lives of everybody really a lot safer to be able to work with there. So from there, the Dread Reaping, as you're seeing in the balls in this encounter, are just the big annoyance to deal with, as you just have to constantly be moving around as a healer and as a range especially. So making sure you're dodging past them, as you will have to get used to dodging these green and black watermelons whenever you move into Rastahkhan's final phase. Now, one mechanic that we missed as Bonsandi comes out is going to be that Plague of Fire, which will constantly be pushing you to stay spread out from other people. So melee will have light spread for themselves. Otherwise, the rest of the ranged DPSers are going to be pretty spread out over the course of this fight, so they're not spreading the fire debuff onto each other. When you go out into this final phase, you'll constantly just be having Plagues of Fire, Death's Doors, which will be similar to Zekvaz, where you'll be leaving a debuff onto the ground whenever you're done with it, as well as having those Scorching Detonations and Plague of Frogs going out. So following basically the culmination of all of his mechanics and just full-on spamming, he's always casting a different ability at once, and he'll just continue ramping up and increasing in damage until you'll be able to burn him. So this is where pacing yourself, being sure to use a lot of your cooldowns, for example, like your healing tides whenever you need to, especially whenever you're in like the death phase, because that'll be ramping up heavy damage onto the entirety of the group, and then cycling them periodically after any of the Scorching Detonations, especially as he starts increasing the damage that he's dealing. Those will be the big areas of importance that you need to start focusing on to be able to deal with. At inevitable end will continue killing anybody who stands in his radius, so making sure people are having the proper positioning, moving any of the death doors really far out so you'll be more easily able to dodge any of the orbs that they're spawning. Those are all going to be key components to making sure that you're staying alive in this encounter and keeping everybody else the same way. Hope you all enjoyed this quick review of the next 3 bosses in Dazar'alor. The last set is going to go over Mechatork, the Stormwall Blockade, and of course Jaina. So got any questions or suggestions for future videos, be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And be sure to check out the live stream where we'll be streaming all of our mythic progression throughout. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.